speaker who will be examining the future of money with us is a very colorful character and a really seasoned entrepreneur, Dorji Sun. Dorji will be talking about what he calls surfing the waves of change in the financial world. Now, Dorji is a World Economic Forum global leader, and also the CEO and founder of Perlin.net, an international trade-based blockchain supported by the International Chamber of Commerce and the Singapore government. Over his career, Dorji has co-founded over 20 successful businesses, social enterprises, and he is also passionate about the environment and environmental conversation. And that resulted in him being named Hero of the Environment by Time magazine. His quest to conserve the rainforests was actually turned into a movie called The Burning Season, which was narrated by Hugh Jackman. Dorji shares in his session some practical advice for entrepreneurs, like, for example, the toothbrush test to make sure that your product is going to be viable. And he will also share his idea around the 4H composition of effective teams. But he also talks about the digital economy, about how the blockchain supports the validity of data, and he gives a lot of practical advice and insight in finance. Thank you. Good morning, Dorji, and thank you for joining us here at the Inspired Conference on the third day, where we will be talking about the future of money. And we're so privileged to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, El-Marie. It's a real pleasure, and congratulations on all the excellent work you're doing with Inspired.
Thank you so much. Well, Dorji, let's dive right in. You know, you are, can I say, a serial entrepreneur, having created so many companies and, you know, just being so immersed in the world of not only of finance, but social entrepreneurship and the environment, and busy with so many different things. So I'm sure you have great advice and to offer our audience. Let me ask you, do you call yourself a social entrepreneur, and how would you define what social entrepreneurship means?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think when I was younger, so my first startups were largely around software, you know, so at university, like most people who don't know what they really want to do, I studied law and finance, and also found that, you know, like university actually really wasn't for me. I tried to drop out, but being from an immigrant family, there's no chance that my parents would allow that. So I persevered and I managed to kind of survive. The most meaningful thing actually I did at university was an international exchange. So if the audience here is looking for purpose, even though it's COVID times, maybe consider lockdown in a different country or different culture. So I was in China for 2 years. So when I came back, coming back to your question, I started a software company with some friends. And I really think that back at that time, I was really focused on how do you build a sustainable business. It was fortunate that that software company had revenues, it had profits. And then moving on, the next company I did was with another friend, we started an education company. And I think that when you start thinking about your time, and I think everyone during COVID, during lockdown, you really are forced to think about, like, why are we here? You know, what makes us happy? If you're taking, suddenly all the distractions are taken away, you really think, like, what is the legacy or what are you trying to impact? And so for that reason, I think it became quite clear to me in my mid to late 20s, making money was something which obviously was necessary from a Maslow hierarchy of needs perspective, but it really was more about what are the either triple bottom line impacts or what are the other outcomes that you're aiming for. So to come back to your question, I think a social entrepreneur, it can be defined by some of the rigor that's been developed. But when I was 29 years old, I started a company called Carbon Conservation. Its purpose was to conserve rainforests because of its biodiversity and its huge climate responsibilities, but also at the same time make it financially viable with carbon trading and carbon sales. And so from that perspective, I think that was when I really coalesced around this idea that you can make a business, and that's important, and it's very respectable. But if you can actually have a business that has positive outcome on either, well, whatever you value. So some people are particularly moved by, say, sub-Saharan, society and youth, or some people are moved by healthcare. From my perspective, it changes as well. So right now we're doing a project in COVID because I think, what the toll that COVID has wreaked on both the world as well as individuals is terrible. But I continue now for, wow, it's 13, 14 years. I've been working on environmental issues because to me, that is a root sort of like a problem. But to answer your question in a very simple way, I think that to be a social entrepreneur, you just have to have a multitude of outcomes you're trying to extract, not just money making. So there are certainly many businesses, and my wife and I, we've angel invested now in nearly 30 projects. There's many businesses that just don't interest us because they don't hit a certain type of social baseline.
And thank you. That's a great explanation, Dorji. I think that people might be interested. You mentioned from the start of your business that you wanted a sustainable business, and it's very interesting to see the different interpretations that people have when they hear the word sustainable. And secondly, my experience in working with a lot of NGOs, when you talk about sustainability, that's something they don't really understand. So maybe you could give a little bit more context or
Sure.
explain what do you mean by sustainable business?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, a business needs to support staff and needs to support the COGS, or the cost of goods sold. So just very simply, I think that sometimes in the hype of startups, and sometimes in the surreal venture capital world, and even the surreal cryptocurrency world, which I'm happy to talk about, there is a lack of what is essentially a product market fit. So essentially, you have to make a product that fits a market, that has a demand. I like to use what they call the toothbrush test. So the toothbrush test is it a product that will be used twice a day by someone? Because if not, I mean, is it, what type of measure does it really have as a baseline use? So whenever I start a business, it's very simple. It's it's one, product; two, sell the product; and then three, fulfill the product. And if you pick the right product, it'll have high margins and a network effect and viral growth. And it's constantly used, and it builds a brand. So one of the challenges, and we'll bring it back to the cryptocurrency world in a second. One of the challenges is some of these new technologies, you're able to raise money before you can prove traction or prove a product necessarily is needed, and that's fine. I mean, it's just a different way of fundraising. But it's like WeWork, or it's like some of these bigger companies which will raise huge amounts of funding, but not necessarily based on real demand and real usage. So just to come back to your question, when you look at sustainable, the first like test for me, obviously, if you want to start an NGO, fantastic. Huge respect to people who impact the world that way. But I find that I've tried to do philanthropy, I've tried to do not-for-profit structures. I'm just naturally geared to look for where is value, where does someone value what it is that you're producing, how do you create a positive impact at the time when you make that sale. So sustainability comes from an economic sense as well as from a social and a sustainability environmental context.
You've mentioned some really, really interesting concept, and I love the idea of the toothbrush test. Because what I have noticed when I deal with a lot of young entrepreneurs is they have an idea. And because they have the idea, they immediately jump into either, as you say, raising funds, which some of them manage to do on an idea, and they develop something, but there's no market for it. And it's just, I think a lot of money is wasted by investors, on ideas that never really go anywhere.
I call it, look, it's the law of the jungle. And, I think that in this world of political correctness and don't get me wrong, I absolutely, believe that we should be a more civil society. But business and life, if you go back to some of the environmental ecosystems that I adore, you know, like if you think about the savannah of Africa, a place that you'd be well familiar with. I mean, no quarter given, no quarter taken. You know, you're not entitled to anything. So, young entrepreneur, expect to fail fast. If you have a belief in something, like for me with carbon trading and carbon credits and rainforests, this is, maybe it'll be a defining story in my life, or it could be just a bloody big waste of time. Right? I don't know. It's 13 years and it's still going. And the market for rainforest carbon still has not been proven, but it's something that my wife and I will fund on the side and do on the side because we're passionate about. But, you know, coming back to you know, the ultimate question, you know, if you're a young entrepreneur and, you know, you feel disappointed that something isn't getting traction, you have to make a call every day of your life. Do you double down or do you pull out and pivot? And there's no shame in either path. And there are many cases of failures. Like, so for me, of all of my, you know, now 20 startups, 4 of them have successfully reached some type of exit, but 16 of them have failed and failed badly. But yeah, just coming back, I think that no one is entitled to a living. You know, you have to make something that the world is valued, that the world values, that is valued in the world. So I could go on many different tangents on examples, but I think it's very important for people to understand that if you're not making something that someone will value, that someone will pay for, then unfortunately, you know, you may be barking up the wrong tree.
And that's, I think, why if you look at the design thinking framework, whether you look at Stanford, the Stanford model or other models, they all start with empathy and really understanding the needs of others. Because if you think you would want, you know, is that really, have you gained all those perspectives of other people? So, and you also mentioned another thing, and that's the ability to fail successfully. I think if you don't, as a person, as an entrepreneur, develop that capacity to fail successfully, then you are going to just live a life of severe disappointment, because not everything we do is always a success.
Yeah. No, I mean, like one of the things I want to teach my children is resilience, because, you know, like life is not a Walt Disney fairy tale. I mean, life sometimes will suck. Sometimes you'll have to grovel. Sometimes you'll have to pivot. You know, it just is what it is. So at a very early age, I think I've been quite resilient in terms of getting rejection. So what you realize very early on is you can either not make a pitch or not make a proposal and get a definite no, or you can try and then try again. And there's many fantastic adages that I live by, like no is the first step to yes. You know, no, or a obstacle of the weak is a stepping stone for the strong. I mean, it does go back to your wiring or your programming, because if you don't swing for something epic, then you will certainly not, well, it's highly unlikely that you're going to achieve success or massive success.
Yeah.
And given just that every human, like I think about everything in terms of time. So, you know, so it is a privilege to share this hour with you. And for that, I am very grateful. And to the audience who watches this, again, immense gratitude for the time that you are sharing or investing into this interview. But all you can think about is, you know, if we're lucky, maybe we have 80 to 85 years. And then how do you spend those years? Is it spent doing something that you're half-assed about, don't care about, not present with? Or is it something that you really feel engaged and swinging for the fences? But of course, you know, there are human boundaries, meaning, you know, there are certainly some situations where I've been in where I have felt anxiety. So I had to do a speech on COVID. I do not have a medical training. It was my first such webinar, and there was 1,000 people online. But we got through it. It was successful. You know, so it's then a question of, you know, do you push your boundary? How often do you push your boundary? And then, you know, are you comfortable doing that? It's not for everyone, but I'm just saying that if you have that constitution and that resolve, you know, I encourage you to test yourself.
That's good advice, and it's something I always talk about. It is about developing resilience, and for young entrepreneurs, I think that is one of the biggest problems. Is because it's really a tough world, right? It's not safe. It's a lot of risk that you're taking, and I think that personal overcoming the if it failed, that you don't take it personally. But as you say, no is the first step to a yes, and that is a great adage or way to look at it. Now, would you say that some people pretend to be social entrepreneurs, and is there, they say they are, but they say I don't worry, I don't care about profit. Is that? I mean, there's nothing wrong with making money,
No,
right?
no, look, I mean, so from my perspective, I'm not here to judge. I think, there's many adages about that, but from my perspective, obviously you do hope people, so let's take Jeff Bezos. I mean, what he has built is something amazing, especially during COVID. We're ordering on Amazon daily. So, should he be guilted for having that much money? No, but should he potentially be considering putting that money back into important causes? For sure. So he put $10 billion into the Bezos Earth Fund. Fantastic. If you can actually preserve ecosystems, if Amazon can protect the Amazon, phenomenal. I think that it's a responsibility when you have that much money. But I don't think people are false. I think that there are people who do act fraudulently, which obviously is not good. In the cryptocurrency space, there's a lot of what I would call gray areas because it's still moving faster than legislation. So, I mean, I think that everything we've done, for example, with Perlin, we've tried our hardest, but developing a new product in a very highly, rapidly evolving space with also needing to get legal opinions and legal understandings has been a challenge. And all the while trying to get product market fit and finding adoption, it's turned out to be far more complicated than I thought. I mean, for example, if we wanted to start a business simply, making hamburgers, it's a very straightforward thing. But if you're trying to create a decentralized financial exchange or some other type of, I can tell you a bit more about what we're doing in a second. But you have to be mindful that you're going to get a lot of failures. But coming back to your question, I don't judge people at all. I think that if you start with the best of intentions and you are able to achieve them, that's obviously the dream. But if you start with the best of intentions, but then find that the path that you've taken is not financially sustainable, or you're not able to generate the types of returns that you need to survive, and then you have to change business, that's also understandable. I think it's a very rare person that's able to be a Gandhi, and say, I'm going to take the peaceful way and starve myself and change a regime. I think it's also a very, very rare person that can be the Martin Luther King. So to have those people with the Greta Thunberg type mettle, they're gifts to the world. And if you are one of those people, fantastic and amazing. But I think it would be an incredibly lonely life, and an incredibly challenging life. So, would Nelson Mandela, if I had the chance to be Nelson Mandela, hell no. I don't want to have that type of a life, So again, it comes back to the person. But
Yeah.
I think to answer your question simply, I think that it's everything is constant flux. Some people get lucky, like Mark Zuckerberg has never known hardship business-wise, meaning he started Facebook in his dorm and he's successfully just grown that at an exponential rate. And there's positive survivor bias in the media. That's not most likely not going to be your journey. And if it is, you're very fortunate, and you need to be empathetic for all of those people that will go through severe hardship and massive failure. So I think obviously the world does need a playing field that is sustainable. So to deal with the carbon and the climate change side, I guess, before the future of money and the cryptocurrency side, but to link them, I think that it is impossible to have economic growth, constant economic growth, the planetary boundaries just do not allow for it. I also think that it is necessary to have a recognition that we're in a closed ecosystem, which means carbon emissions, plastic waste, all of the externalities currently not factored in by economics have to be factored in. And that means that the beef hamburger that you eat has a greater footprint, and therefore and not just climate, I'm talking about water, I'm talking about impact, deforestation, if it comes from Brazil, etc., etc. That beef hamburger is going to have a far greater footprint than, say, eating dal bhat or having paratha. So these types of pricing is going to be needed to be incorporated into the future of the economy. That's why carbon credits must have a role in the future economics. So longer sort of answer.
Many interesting points there, Dorji, that I think we can delve into deeper. But let's look at, you've mentioned cryptocurrency and the blockchain, and maybe you could, for the sake of our audience, give a little bit of an explanation of what is this move towards digital currency and the blockchain. And so many people that I know are talking about cryptocurrency and investing in cryptocurrency. So perhaps you can give us your perspective and what Berlin does in that field.
Yeah. I mean, the world that we live in today is defined by centralized structures, governments, creating laws. And right now, during COVID, is a perfect example of what happens when there is disharmony. So in Obama's era, it's very likely that the G20 would have all come up with rules and regulations and an approach. They would have backed the WHO, and there would be some form of consistency and a return back to normalcy that's really lacking today. What's happening in the UK is different from what's happening in Spain, which is what's different to what's happening in Russia and China. And so you just have this breakdown. And why I use this as an example was Satoshi Nakamoto, who is the founder and that's a pseudonym, no one knows who it is, but the person who invented Bitcoin, it arose after the GFC. So after the global financial crisis, essentially they created a new form of algorithm, which allows for the creation of and this is the blockchain technology, essentially the birth of Bitcoin. And so essentially Bitcoin is a form of value exchange, which does not require centralized ledgers. Like, it doesn't require the Fed Reserve or the Monetary Authority of Singapore. It is its own form of value if there is a tipping point of belief. So when I first discovered Bitcoin, it was 2014. So that was when we started buying some Bitcoin, and it was already at that stage, it was like $400, $500. And today, I think it's now $11,000. And at its peak, obviously there's variability in demand. But the reason I think it's important is because imagine a world where all of the governments are endlessly printing money, which is the world we live in with the COVID stimulus. At what point does value get debased? At what point does the US dollar cease to hold any value? And so when you look at Bretton Woods, when the US dollar was decoupled from gold, you suddenly had this world of hyperinflation. Now, maybe it suits the modern economy well, but I think that people who fundamentally have concerns about what is value, they're either now going into gold, which is at very high prices, or things like Bitcoin, which have limited, and this is mathematically provable, limited supply. So that's part one. Part two is what happens when governments create restrictions. What happens when governments, for example, China, had capital outflow restrictions? What happens when, for example, Greece, during their financial crisis, restricted withdrawal of funds from banks? What happens when there's hyperinflation in Venezuela? Well, this is a system which does not involve, or currently, I mean, there are some countries where it is legally dubious, or it requires licenses, or it's gray, but it's just a system that exists outside of what is government policy and centralized systems. So the biggest thing I think in part one is these algorithms, these technologies have created systems that surmount or circumvent man-made, human-made, quote unquote laws. And so that is a movement which now is being able to be used for, what is a smart contract. So basically code that executes based on an oracle or based on data. And an example of that, which I thought was very cool, was there was an experiment with a insurance company in Singapore where women who were pregnant but had gestational diabetes, if they from their obstetrician received a certain reading, they would just automatically be paid out without having to lodge a claim, without having to call a center, blah blah blah. It was all just based on data. So the gestational diabetes test in terms of the blood sugar level, the reading came back as being X. That results in automatic payment. Or what if, for example, many governments are offering a baby bonus in order to fight dropping fertility rates. So all that happens is, instead of having to, officially declare and apply and fill out forms, it all just self-executes based on, the birth register. So this is where then having digital money also has huge efficiency gains and also has ways of circumventing potential corruption. So just today, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia was sentenced to 12 years in jail for corruption. Well, actually, if you have a smart contract, and this is something that we've looked at Berlin, if you've got, for example, satellite data that says that a rainforest is being protected, GPS data saying that the people who are protecting the forest are patrolling as is required, that can be an oracle that then pays out in digital currency from a smart contract, assuming that they hit the parameters needed. So the parametric requirements are hit. And then what happens is you don't have, a government, a minister, a governor, or other forms of human leadership potentially having to disperse funds with all of the challenges that involves. So I think that there is a dream which started from having a different form of money that doesn't require some centralized person in a quote unquote suit regulating you. It can be regulated by nodes, by technology, by miners, by stakers. And then that then gave rise to the ability to have, these types of smart contracts and oracles, which then can self-execute. So that's why it's now been, it's now been 12 years since the white paper was first written. I assure you that in a further 12 years, the innovation in this space is unbelievable. And I think that there'll be significant challenges to the man-made conditions in the financial system, just looking at the way that governments are just irresponsibly, in my opinion, endlessly printing money. Like, I think that what's happening today is just quite inconceivable that governments that claim to be, somewhat market-based would just print unlimited amounts of money. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the next 5 years play out.
I can imagine that there would be a lot of resistance from people in government, right? I'm framing this against what's happening in South Africa, and how what you're describing is something that would give such guarantees to humans and would save so much. But moving into that space, I think there would be a lot of resistance by people that would not want to be have those ethical boundaries that would be that you're talking about.
Look, I mean, I think so. So there is definitely an element of the cryptocurrency world which is not in any way, shape, or form endorsable. As a person that I would consider to have, I consider myself to be ethical. When right and wrong. I think that there is very clear examples of people who will hack Elon Musk's Twitter or promote Bitcoin in ways that really obviously brings disrepute to the space. And so there's always going to be an element where the lack of regulation and the lack of transparency in the crypto side can give rise to what you could term as unethical or fraudulent or illegitimate behavior. That exists, but it also exists in the plain light of day. Many governments were there to be, ethics committee reviews, would certainly not stand up
Yeah.
and meet the standard. So I think that, human nature is human nature. There are enabling tools and enabling circumstances. So if one of the reasons why we're based in Singapore is, I mean, like, however you see the structures of government here, I think that their absolute commitment to no corruption, very, very transparent process, technocratic government is very admirable and is very comfortable. So for people like myself who really just want to get the job done, wake up every morning motivated to try to build something, it's a very enabling environment, as opposed to having to, necessarily navigate backroom dealings just to get licenses and applications and,
Yeah.
mandates to work. So that's why, the cryptocurrency space, I think, just from a technological innovation perspective, like, to give you one example, so Perlin worked with the International Chamber of Commerce. It is the peak body for trade and for trade legislation. So if you ever shipped a good, FOB, so all the Incoterms, FOB, CIF, etc., were invented by the ICC in 1937. So they're 100-year-old not-for-profit, and we built them a blockchain pilot platform, because right now, if you, for example, shipped coffee beans from Kenya to Malaysia, the transport of those beans would be different from the bill of lading, letter of credit, certificates of origin, and all the paper documents that are financing that shipment. So it is now, because of the pandemic, banks are shutting down their back offices. They're unable to process that paper. And you've got huge cases where, traders will refinance multiple times with multiple banks off the same goods.
Wow.
So you're now having huge collapse in the real economy. So, back when the global financial crisis hit, many of the investment banks and many of the, mortgage brokers went bust. Of course, that had a huge impact. But here, small to medium-sized businesses, millions of them, are all not being able to refinance trade. And so I think that's when supply chains really break down. So blockchain can actually help solve that, because it provides a way for a single certificate of origin or a single bill of lading, because it's tokenized, it's on the blockchain, it's unique, and it's traceable and trackable and verifiable, not because of a central ledger. So that's the type of opportunity that, and I think it was the Asian Development Bank just came out with numbers saying that the opportunities in trade finance are now $3 to $5 trillion. That's the size of the gap. And what we're doing with Perlin now, with Perlin X, is looking at how do you create decentralized cryptographic financing mechanisms for that type of commodity and trade finance. And that's hugely exciting, because if you think about it, current banking systems are receiving money at 0% interest, sometimes negative percentage interest, and yet they're lending it out to these poor small to medium-sized traders at 10 to 12%, just because of the risk and their inability to manage paper flow and the operational costs and transactional costs of that trade. So if you can do that through smart contracts, if you can do that with decentralized finance, obviously a hugely powerful innovation for small to medium-sized businesses.
And it does sound to me, we're all looking at the future of money, and it does sound to me as if that, from what you're saying, is what you believe the future of money is. It's moving into a digital space.
The future of money is not a Fed Reserve deciding to print trillions of dollars because a whole bunch of senators in America, they've hit their debt ceiling, and then everyone's walking around with $1 George Washingtons. I mean, this is just not the future. I mean, so I think that there's going to be some massive disruptions. Already you can see machinations around what happens if the US dollar, is debased or is replaced as the world's currency. I mean, I'm hugely concerned about that, because I kind of like the world that we live in with stability. I'm not personally, a hoodie wearing person that wants to disrupt the world. I would just like to bring better semblances and closer alignment to what I term as science. So I would like government policy to reflect science. On climate change, to bring back what we were discussing, I think that it is bonkers for governments to be playing this experiment with with the ecosystems and with the atmosphere, just follow science. Like, let's be a little Vulcan and follow science. So from my perspective, again, I do think that the future of money, change is always slow in these types of multilateral institutions. These types of crises like the pandemic speed up change, but the current lack of leadership in the world will make change slower. But I think that the future of money, like if you just look at millennials, the question is, does a millennial trust a note backed by Trump, which is essentially US dollar, or any other government, or do they trust maths? And I think that maths and science and computer code are far more trustworthy than a promissory note from a whole bunch of old senators and a president. And similarly, just looking at gold, like I think gold obviously has a place, but to custodian gold, like if I have a bar of gold in my cupboard, that's going to be not necessarily efficient. So that's why I think cryptocurrencies, with all of the efficiency benefits, the programming benefits that they bring, they have a very strong future.
That's quite inspiring, I think, for young people to think that there's a big space to explore, and it offers a lot of opportunity for the future. And you did mention also the Greta Thunbergs, but what's something that's really interesting to me is the whole the Gen Zs and the millennials having that focus on companies and causes that are morally sound and that are bringing social improvement in the world. And it really is quite interesting for me from the interviews that we've had. A lot of them have mentioned, when they're interviewing young people today, the question is not just about how much are you going to pay me, but what do you do with your profits, and what social responsibility are you showing? What's your cause that you are as a company that you are focusing on? How ethical are your practices? And having that blockchain technology involved, I think would enhance that. How does blockchain and COVID work? I know that's something that you've been working on, because I think that is a problem that everybody's facing at the moment.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, how I would link this to the prior conversation is, I think that in life, you have to have a mindset of experimenting. I think that the world of a 9-to-5 job for 40 years, then you retire with a gold watch, they're gone. The world is more VUCA, volatile, uncertain, blah, blah, blah. So from my perspective, when the COVID situation hit, at Berlin, we were working on things like tokenized carbon credits. But it became very apparent when all of air travel shut down, because air travel is one of the major drivers for carbon pricing. It became very clear that that was not going to be recovering anytime soon. And into now July, August, most people are predicting that air travel is not going to return. And carbon emissions are down 8% this year. So carbon markets have been debilitated, quite significantly. So coming back, you always have to wake up in the morning with your eyes wide open. This is like the savannah of Africa, eat or be eaten. So when COVID kind of happened, we were back to the drawing board. Also at the time, decentralized finance was moving strongly. So we had some research and we were looking at that space. So it has turned out that we see huge potential in that area. So many of the decentralized protocols now represent hundreds of millions of dollars, if not over $1 billion of value. So we were running several parallel lines of work. So that was one. And then COVID, we were looking at, like, is there a use for the blockchain for the work that we were doing with Berlin in the blockchain? And so we deployed some resources looking at the problem of how do you create interoperable trust if countries aren't even trusting each other, so everyone's closing borders. If I have a a vaccine, or if I have a test and I travel to another country, how does that country know that I've had the test? Is it literally like my yellow pass to show that I've had a yellow fever vaccine, which is easily forgeable? Or is there some form of attestation process where a doctor at a creditable clinic gives me a test, says I'm negative, attests on my smartphone, the signature hashes to the blockchain, and that's verifiable when I try to board a plane. And so that was just a path that we took. We've got a pilot with Etihad, the airline, and we've got a few things that are bubbling along. Ultimately, maybe it's optimism, but I think that there will be an end to COVID. So how long will people need health passes on the blockchain on a mobile phone forever? Is a huge question mark. How long will they need? Given that governments can't even seem to organize some of the most basic function, can they create a tradable, easily navigatable travel world? Again, a huge question mark. So in the end, from a Perlian X standpoint, the direction we decided to go was decentralized finance, targeting commodities, targeting trading. And that was just simply because we feel more confidence relying on the community in the decentralized economy than we do in terms of the policymakers in governments. Because ultimately, when you deal with something like international travel and COVID, you're dealing with governments and government regulations. And to be honest, Elmarie, if you go back in my personal career, I was least happy in carbon, even though I was the most empowered, because I think it's the biggest problem facing our generation. But I was least happy because we were at the whim of governments. So for the last 13, 14 years, actually, all I've been doing is tinkering away, experimenting in carbon, waiting for governments to actually create binding policy that creates a carbon market. Like there's still to this day is no government prepared to put a dollar amount on carbon credits from tropical rainforests. I mean, you do have some in Australia where you can protect a forest in Australia, generate carbon. So we've done $3 million trades with Rio Tinto. We've done some carbon, but just coming back, what is most startling is that in the world of COVID, governments could ease the pain significantly, but they're playing politics and they're also not harmonizing policy with their other sovereign states. So that's why I've gone on a bit of a rant. The use of blockchain for COVID is simple. It simply is China does not trust America, so will not trust a health pass that has been made by Apple and Google, which they have one. America does not trust China. It doesn't even trust TikTok. So it's not going to trust the WeChat-based, ad financial health pass that has been used by all the Chinese. Who do you trust? You have to trust a blockchain. And in our case, it's the Ethereum blockchain. So again, it's just an interesting way that decentralized technology can disintermediate these types of sovereign challenges. And also at the same time, it protects your privacy. We do not take any of your medical or personal data. It is hashed, which is scientifically impossible to reverse engineer. And then that signature is all that you're able to test. So just to be really clear, we think that it's a phenomenally elegant solution, and it's being used and adopted, but we have no idea whether or not this is a very fertile area of opportunity, because we're at the behest and at the whim of governments that are not necessarily behaving in a scientifically robust way. The last point I'll make on that is, for those of you interested, there has been studies which span now nearly 10,000 people, 5.3 times lower rates of infection if you test everyone before they get on the plane. Like, you don't need quarantine, you don't need all of that jazz unless the person gets sick in transit. But if you have a test 72 hours or 96 hours before you get on a plane and you have a COVID negative test result on a blockchain enabled app like what we've built for the ICC AOK pass, you can then know that the people on that plane for the last 96 hours or 72 hours have not been infected, that there will not be a quarantine plane, there will not be shocks of 50 people, infected when tested on arrival. But it requires governments to trust that everyone on the network has laboratories and clinics that they all meet the standard of, which we have, and they all trust the digital rails on the Ethereum blockchain. So I truly believe we can restart travel. It's just a question of whether or not governments would trust this technology platform or this approach, given
I can imagine. I mean, you spoke about Etihad, or talking to Etihad about this, but I, at the end of the day, as a traveler, and I mean, just like you, I travel all the time, right? So I would then look at airlines and say, well, which airline has adopted this technology? Because it would give me a greater sense of security. So it makes a lot of sense for in the travel world for airlines to adopt this kind of technology. But as you also mentioned, you have governments in the background, and I can personally my own story of having been stuck in Turkey for 3 months. I went for the COVID test. I had the certificate showing COVID negative, and when I arrived at the airport in Malaysia, they literally almost tore up that certificate and said, "This means nothing to us. You must be tested again." And then I had to be tested again. And I mean, yes, testing is important, but I'm just wondering, it was not the test per se that got to me. It was the lack of trust in the government officials from, so if you could find a mechanism that can sort that out, it would make us all safer. And as you say, travel can reopen and countries can reopen and the economies can reopen. But why people are hesitant to look at this kind of thing. So great stuff that you're doing, Dorji, and I hope that more, and I hope that people listening to this conversation would also take this message somewhere, because I think that is so crucial. Dorji, just to talk about something else, you mentioned way back in our conversation, you talked about you being an angel investor. And that is something that I think lots of people would want to understand a little bit more. The whole concept of angel investing and what makes you choose an entrepreneur, a product, a new development. What would make you put money into that?
Sure. So, I mean, I think there's different buckets in my head. So I think that there are businesses where there's proven traction, like there's a product we like, and we'll invest in something that we see as it's got a need, it's got a proven product, and it's got proven demand, and it's growing. So there are projects like that. Of course, anything can go wrong. Like something like COVID can crush a product that's doing well. But then it comes down to can the organizers, the leaders, then innovate and pivot and change. So for example, like we've been very interested in quantum computing. Again, it's just, I won't go into too much detail, but there are certain functions that quantum computers can do infinitely better than a classical computer. So a friend of mine, a guy that I got to know over a year, he's a professor, he was a professor, he decided to start a company in that area. And so we invested into that. And then what was exciting was they just closed money from Sequoia, which is one of the biggest investment funds. So, so there's examples where it's future tech and the person is a very clear winner. Then to go back to my earlier example, cannabis was legalized in America in some of the states. Another friend of mine, actually his dad had pancreatic cancer. And so when his father was terminally ill, he had no appetite. He was going through terrible chemotherapy treatment. And the only thing that would give him appetite and pain relief was cannabis. And so he started a company. It now has 7 of the 10 top selling SKUs. It's a vape cannabis product called Infused in the state of Washington, fully legitimate, all legal. And so we invested in that because it was showing growth. It was a real product and demand was growing. So there's different forms of investment. The third bucket, so this is I guess what I would consider to be my work in carbon right now. So obviously I have a full-time job. I'm working in the decentralized finance and in the cryptocurrency world for Berlin. But you know, the passion that I have, my interest is around forest conservation and around environmental initiatives. And so the third bucket really is, you know, we're funding different types of environmental initiatives, rainforest conservation slash carbon generation. Now, if we're lucky and Biden wins the election in November the 3rd, and if he was to bring back a piece of legislation that was previously passed in the House, but then failed at the Senate by Obama, called Waxman-Markey, it was a bill that would have created a demand of $5 to $10 billion a year for rainforest originated carbon credits, then that will be very successful. But it's also been 13 years in work in progress, and we still don't have any legislation, and who the hell knows what's going to happen in the American election. So just to answer your question, I think in angel investing, there's 3 different buckets, and very happy to provide any more detail if people are interested.
That's great. And, you know, do you have a mechanism? Do you have like, how do you find these people? How do you, you know, is there a, do people
Yeah.
reach out to you? Do you just look at look at what's happening and you've got those, you know, sort of
Yeah. Look, I
investigative
mean,
fingers?
you know, first of all, I'd say to everyone listening, like, you got to wake up switched on. Like a lot of people kind of like, you know, they watch Netflix, then they scroll Instagram, and then they're like, why does nothing happen for me? It's because you're not on. Um, and you know, I think that the crazy thing about having a quote unquote job is it kind of makes people think that they don't need to keep their eyes open. But the fact is that, you know, like, I'll talk to my friend. So first of all, we saw that we read the newspapers slash blogs slash, you know, Twitter. You see that deregulation is coming for cannabis. And then it just so happens it's called network theory. It's called the strength of weak links. So basically, if you have a small group of very tight-knit friends, or if I have, you know, so if I have 5 very close friends versus 10 very weak friends, the 10 weak friends are far stronger because they plug you into many, many different things. So I do a lot of leadership programs. I'm pretty old school in that my Twitter game and my online game is pretty poor compared to, say, face to face. So when I back before COVID, you know, I'd go to a lot of conferences, I'd do leadership programs, I'd meet a lot of people. I'm more of a WhatsApp, you know, small social graph type guy, but I have very weak links to many different areas. So a lot of the stuff that happens is, you know, someone will be very, very busy, or I'll read about something in a newspaper. So, you know, I was researching quantum computing, and then I was like, oh, okay, so Joe's a professor of that. We had some coffees. He talked about what he wanted to do. He said he wanted to start a company. I was like, I'm in, you know. And then another example was, you know, like looking at cannabis deregulation, you know, that's going to generate some huge winners. And so again, linking to that. But I think a lot of it is down to, one, you have to keep your eyes open, read everything. If you notice something that you think is going to go up in value, you get in. So one example actually was we invested quite early in Zoom, not so after listing, and that was simply because the service was just much better than a lot of, like, I hate like Skype. Oh my gosh, you know, like some of the other video platforms. And so, you know, we've done very well in investment like that. When COVID happened, my wife and I, we sat down and we were like, okay, which companies are going to benefit? Okay, so we think that there's going to be some testing companies, there's going to be some long shot companies, there's going to be digital companies, there's going to be, you know, travel companies are going to go down, you know. So as soon as something hits, you got to be the first to move. You're either smart enough to have predicted it, and, you know, as we were discussing before, I call this surfing storms. Every day there's different sorts of storms. COVID is just a particularly global one where we were able to say, okay, there are equities that we can invest in, which will be impacted. We're holding back money because we do think that property prices, after all of this crazy stimulus money and rent support ends, there will be some type of change in terms of property value. And we've also doubled down efforts in some of the technology spaces that will benefit, including, for example, like the cryptocurrency, decentralized finance Perlin, things like that.
So I'm picking up quite a number of themes here. The first one is that you've got to diversify. You can't just focus on one thing. You have to have, as you call it, different buckets in which you look at. The second thing is you're saying be alert, read, be aware, be mindful, look out for opportunities. It's not going to come knocking at your door. You are the one that you have to be proactive. And I think that is a lesson, not just for an investor, but for anybody who wants to survive in this volatile world, is to look at trying to find some trends and trying to just also prepare yourself with the right skills so that you are, you will always be in demand, because I think so many people find themselves at a crossroads now, Dorji. I've studied this, I am this, I have these skills, and suddenly the carpet's just been ripped, from under your feet. So what skills would you say, and I mean, clearly you're a multi-talented, deep thinking person, and what skills would you say should people focus on?
So I'll give you so I call it the 4 H's. This goes back to when I was teaching entrepreneurship at University of New South Wales, where I studied. So the 4 H's: you're either a hacker, so when you hack, you make something. You're a hustler, which means that you can sell and promote. You're a hipster, which means you've got an eye for design, or you're a thought leader, or you're a kind of like a tastemaker. Or you're a housekeeper, which is you're really good at operational stuff, right? So whenever I invest in startups in the past and when I've taught, I've always found that very successful teams have 4 people or a number of people who have that combination of skills. So hacker, hustler, hipster, housekeeper. And the 4 H's, if you're all working in concert and if you're all, on, it could very well be that the hacker goes, hey, I built something. And then the hustler goes, I can sell that. And they go, hustle it. And then the hipster says, well, actually, if we marketed it like this, we would have a higher price. And then the housekeeper just makes sure everything is licensed and no one goes to jail and is operating and you scale, etc. So just to come back to, the skills, what's the skill you need? Well, you need to be fun to work with. You need to be decently connected or know people who generate energy and generate opportunity. And, if you're a hacker, be a good hacker. If you're a hustler, be a good hustler. If you're a hipster, be a good hipster. Now, if you're not inclined to making teams, maybe what you do is you try to do a multitude of these things, right? So, but just coming back to what you were asking, I think it's very simple. Either you hack something, you make something. So when I say hacker, that could mean, so right now I'm thinking, because I really miss my mum's chili. I think that I might start a company selling her chili just because I miss it so damn much and it's so damn good. So in this case, my mum is the hacker who makes chili. I'm the hustler. So I'll go to all the restaurants and say, or in today's COVID world, try to sell it online. And then we'll need a hipster. So my brother and sister are very hipster-esque. One's in Darwin in the outback, the other one's in Melbourne, but get them to get the design and the thought leadership and all organic produce and whatever. And then, then we just get a housekeeper who can just help us manage and grow that. But a hacker doesn't have to be technological. It can be some of the greatest products, are very non-tech, but just think about what is it like. I'll give you a stupid example. My wife and I we were eating oat milk. So we're trying to reduce our footprint and, milk is murder and all of that stuff. We still eat dairy, but we were basically using Oatly. Oatly is oat milk. And we were like, who buys this like $6 oat milk?
Yeah.
It's good, but actually we prefer, there's another brand we prefer. Anyway, so and then 3 days ago, it just was announced they raised money at $2 billion valuation. $2 billion for oat milk. And they got the money from like Oprah, Jay-Z, Beyonce, all of these people. So you don't know what the world wants, but apparently it wants $6 oat milk. Just who the hell knows? You might try dental flossing, and you're like, oh my God, this dental floss is amazing. You research the company, research the brand, research the thing. It's made by some like small company, and then you help them, and then suddenly it becomes a big company. So, it's just like, there's just so much opportunity. It's insane. So, just be alert to, it's fun as well. Like, who wants to sit doing one thing, be boring? I mean, life is fun.
That's I love the 4H analogy, and I think that's something that really puts, because usually people talk about skills in these sort of boring terms, right? You have to be a good communicator, the 4 C's of the 21st century, and I just think using those terms have already become outdated. I think people will be able to relate more to these skills, and I think you've got to evaluate yourself and say, where's your strengths and where do you actually push yourself as well? Not just say, well, I can't do this. You have to have a multitude of talents today in order to be able to, you have to be flexible, you have to be agile, and you have to be aware, and you have to be, be able to communicate with people. If you can't do that, you're not going to make it moving forward. So those are really important skills. We're almost at the end of our interview, Dorji, and I can't let you not talk about, or I would love for you to give us a little bit more about the movie, The Burning Season, and where your passion for carbon actually started, and maybe some advice to people that are unaware or want to do something to make a difference, because you say carbon is one of the biggest threats that the
Wow.
world is
Have
facing.
you seen the movie?
No, to be honest, I haven't. I haven't
Yeah.
seen.
So where did that come from? Oh, this is actually so wow. So it's been so that came out Tribeca Film Festival 2009. So this is a blast from the past. And to be honest, I think so I think it's on YouTube and it's out there. It's called The Burning Season. It was narrated by Hugh Jackman. But it just was when I was 29, and I was raising money for rainforests. And anyway, you can see it. We ended up, I think it was right. We raised $430 million. We signed a
Right.
facility with Merrill Lynch, and it had a lot of like travel to forests. It's stuff that like now in my 40s I just wouldn't do. I mean, but coming back to your question, look, what I would, going back in time, and what I would say to anyone watching this is, at a certain point in time in life, you decide you're either going to do or you're not going to do, right? And if you don't do, like, and if you decide to just sit on your couch and eat Cheetos and watch basketball, that's fine. But if you want, and if you yearn, if you feel something that you need to do, you got to get off the couch and propel yourself forward. And so for me, going back in time, what was really weird about that was I was meant to be filmed for something else. And when I met the director, we were just chatting, and I still remember we were at a balcony. It was a Christmas party, and then the director said, "Look, yeah, but I've got some funding to do this documentary on orangutan in the forest." And it was really weird. It was like one of those serendipitous moments, because I'd been working on raising money for forests based on carbon, and I said, "Look, I actually already know the end to that documentary, and it's depressing. To the best of everyone's abilities, the rainforest is still dying, and then the orangutans are still dying,
Yeah.
right?" And I said, "But I see this new thing, carbon, which is going to be disruptive." And so she said, "Okay, wow, I'm going to Indonesia." And I said, "That's great, because I'm going to Indonesia." And then so she's just started filming, and that's what kind of started it. So to come back to your question, my I guess my last piece of advice to everyone was, back then I literally didn't know a lick about carbon. It literally was just internet learnt stuff. But there was this one conference where, so I'm a hustler, I understand how to raise money and sell stuff and do stuff, but I did not have any understanding of carbon, so I needed a hacker. I needed the person who could help be my Sherpa in carbon. And then later on, I would add a hipster and a housekeeper as I built up the company, but I needed a hacker. So there was this conference, and I still remember it distinctly. It was in the Cairns Hilton, and it was the UN only, discussing the future of carbon from rainforests. And I was not invited, and only countries were invited. And I still remember very clearly, like, I was like, okay, this is my do or do not moment. Do I book a flight, book a room in the Hilton, and just sit in the fucking lobby waiting for people to come out of this UN conference and talk to them, or do I not? And, you know, I just decided, like, book the ticket, book the room, and I stayed in the same conference. And, you know, as delegates from this UN, so of course I tried to get in. I wrote to them, I pretended to be press. Their headquarters in Bonn were like, sorry, unless you're a delegate from a country, you can't come. And so obviously I couldn't go, but then I made the trip. I sat there. I started introducing myself as delegates would come out with their name tag to the toilet, and I'd be like, "Hey, how are you?" And then, you know, what I learned very quickly was if you talk to them before they go to the toilet, it's very short. They're like, "I'm busted." If you talk to them after, you know, you have a longer conversation, but you shake their hand, it's wet. You just have to live with that. But I just kind of ingratiated myself into this network around carbon, because everything, whatever the business is, there's a network, you know, and you got to find that network. If you want to play basketball, you got to get to the NBA. If you want to do cryptocurrency, well, we've got a community here. We've got a community in San Francisco. If you want to do tech, it's the Valley. If you want to do finance, it's New York. So you just got to find, so I was just trying to find my network. And some networks grow in strength and power, and some networks wane. So if I was the newspaper network, obviously, you know, that's kind of dying. But if I'm in the TikTok influencer network, that's exploding. So just coming back, that was really the moment where I just was like, okay, let's do. And to be honest, if I had not done, I wouldn't have a documentary, but I probably wouldn't have lost a lot of money and spent a lot of heartbreaking time traveling the world trying to do it. But, you know, that's what defines your life. So last parting, I guess, thought would be, you know, whether it's that girl or whether it's that boy you want to talk to, whether it's that deal you want to go for, whether it's that new startup you want to do, whether it's the job you want to do, you just got to do it, you know. And if you don't do it, don't regret it, but just know that your life is a series of decisions that are made every day, and this could be one of them.
Well, that's exactly why I decided to do this inspired conference, Dorji, because, you know, I was thinking, how am I going to contribute to changing mindsets about the future? How do I reach into those networks? How do I send out this message that, you know, you have a choice whether you see life as a downward trajectory and you live in doom and gloom and you thrive on the negative, or whether you say, well, hang on, I can imagine a better future. I can imagine a world where people, like-minded people, come together and become a force of change. And we reach out across the globe instead of just a conference where people pay $1,000 and you know, they must fly there, so they add to the carbon footprint. Let's see what we can do and how we could organically try to share this message and look at the future from all these different perspectives. So that's a very good message. Just go out and do it and really believe in it and take action, because if we don't all take action, what is the future going to be? So that's a fantastically inspiring message from you, Dorji, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I think a lot of little nuggets that are so valuable will stay with us. And I'm definitely going to look at the 4 H's again and use that in my talks with people. So thank you so much, Dorji.
My pleasure,
I would
Elmarie.
like to encourage people to go on the Headspace app to continue with these conversations, to ask some questions. If you have some questions for Dorji, we can pass that on to him. And, you know, I'm sure if people want to contact you, Dorji, they can contact you by going to Berlin, or how could people, if they have an idea they want to share?
I'm just Dorji Sun on Twitter or on Telegram or Facebook, you know, LinkedIn. No
so they'll find you. If they want to find you, they will find you, Dorji. I mean, that's that action, right?
Very
take
easy.
action.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend that they go sit outside your door and wait for you to come out of the toilet, but I think.
Well, I realize that but there are other ways to do it now.
Thank you so much for your time, Dorji. This was really valuable.
No problems at all. El Marie, thank you so much, and have a great conference, everyone.